Welcome, everybody. We're giving it just a couple of seconds to let folks join us in Zoom, and then we will get started. Great. Well, let's kick it off. If we can go to the next slide, Nancy. A couple of logistics reminders before I turn it over to Director DeMorris. First, I just want to do a quick reminder that we continue to meet in the virtual space, and this session is available via telephone, on your computer, tablet, or smartphone as well. There's live captioning being streamed through Zoom. To enable captions, you can select the CC or transcript icon on your toolbar and subtitles will appear. And of course, we're offering ASL interpretation as well. So we see our interpreter, Anna, is on the screen. After the meeting, we'll be posting the slides, transcript, and recording. And we're saving time for public comment. So those joining us by phone can press *9 to be added to the queue, and we'll unmute you to hear from you directly. Of course, you can always use the Q&A feature to submit your comments and questions as well. And of course, those joining by Zoom can raise their hand and we can unmute your line as well. For additional public comment, please email engage@aging.ca.gov. And another little reminder about the Council's purpose. The goal of the Elder and Disability Justice Coordinating Council is to increase coordination and develop recommendations to prevent and address the abuse, neglect, exploitation, and fraud perpetuated against older adults and adults with disabilities. And with that, I am so happy to welcome Director Susan DeMorris of the California Department of Aging.
Thank you, Maria, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to meeting number 2. I'm so glad you all think it's worthwhile enough to come back a second time. And I know that for many of the members of this committee, and I'm going to call you out by name, you haven't been resting on your laurels since we last met. We've been working busily with the equity framework and the landscape group, and I want to thank Vivian, Nina, Sherry, Liz, Diana Boyer, Howard, Astrid, Claire, who've all been working on the equity work group. And we also have Lisa, Andrea, Achilles, Janie, Edwin, Scarlett, and Marty, who've all been very busy between meetings, also working on the landscape group. So we have a very full agenda today. I want to thank especially Amanda Lawrence, who has been staffing all of us and pulling together our presenters. And lots to talk about today. Looking forward to diving into the agenda. But first, I want to thank Phil Ferrari for joining us. I'm so glad that Phil, who is the Senior Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Section of the Division of Medi-Cal, Fraud, and Elder Abuse, is joining today to bring a message from the Department of Justice. Welcome, Phil.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I am a Senior Assistant Attorney General for DMFEA, which is part of the California Attorney General's office. And that means that I have the privilege of supervising prosecutors who are located throughout the state, working on matters involving older and dependent adults, both neglect and financial or physical abuse, and also prosecuting cases involving efforts to defraud the Medi-Cal program. And while I work on the criminal side of matters, I have a counterpart who oversees an equally committed and talented team of attorneys who pursue civil enforcement actions against those who would try to defraud the Medi-Cal program. Protection against elder abuse and neglect is a fundamental part of our mission. It's a priority for us. It's a priority for the Attorney General. And we are very proud to be part of this Elder and Disability Justice Coordinating Council, which we know is going to enhance our collective abilities to care for and protect some of our most vulnerable residents. And one thing that I kind of want to stress from DMFEA's perspective is that we know very well that protecting against elder and dependent abuse requires a coordinated and collaborative response. And for us, it can be as simple as stating that we can't act upon that which we don't know. We've got these great tools resources, experience, expertise, but unless we get referrals from our partners who we very literally depend upon in state and local government, law enforcement, the public in general, to let us know when there are problems and give us the opportunity to put those tools to work, we can't achieve anything. I wanted to just really briefly mention some of the recent work that we have done here in the area of elder abuse. Just a couple of examples that sort of illustrate both the range and the severity of some of the conduct that we are called upon to address. Just yesterday in Los Angeles County, we secured a felony elder abuse conviction against a former director of nursing who had stolen personal information from a resident in a convalescent home, had opened up multiple credit accounts in that resident's name and had rang up over $70,000 in charges. Just a few weeks earlier, again in Los Angeles, we secured, following a jury trial, a conviction against a certified nursing assistant for both elder abuse and felony sexual battery against an elderly stroke victim who was put into his care. And then a couple months before that in San Diego, we secured a significant prison sentence against a San Diego caretaker whose conduct included not just stealing money and jewelry from the people who were put into his care, but also committing acts of sexual assault against 3 elderly dependents as well. In not one of those cases could we have succeeded without critical assistance from our partners in state agencies, local law enforcement, local government. And so while at DMFEA, we're very proud of the role that we play in this effort, we know it's a limited role, and we know that we are very dependent upon our partners and the work of so many others, like those, our partners at Cal, HHS, and other state and local entities. And that's one of the reasons why we are so supportive of the collaborative and multidisciplinary approach, which we know this council will foster. The last thing I wanted to mention is that I believe my colleague, Deputy Attorney General Megan Anderson, is with us today. She's been involved with this council since the very beginning, and we are very grateful for her work. And we both look forward to advancing the work of the council together. So thank you so much. And again, I'm just so happy to be here today.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you for being here. And unfortunately, thank you for sharing those real life examples that are very current to motivate our work today and in the months to come. For the next slide, as we're starting to get out and about, I've been hearing from our partners with area agencies on aging, our aging and disability resource connections, our county partners, about activities that are underway for June 15th, World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So I want to thank all of you who are part of today's webinar, who are planning activities at the local level to engage and to collaborate, as we just heard from Phil. I've heard great examples where counties are bringing in the legal sector and elected officials, health and human services and advocacy groups. So we encourage you in that work. And we also starting next week, Older Americans Month at the start of May. So I know many of you are working on a range of activities there to educate the public as well. So this is our agenda for today. I want to thank everyone who is contributing. It was very important for all of us who planned the agenda together today, that we heard from a number of perspectives and voices. And so you'll see that we'll move along quickly as we bring in a variety of stakeholder perspectives and expert opinions. And I will start with the first. We have a number of state partners and committee members who, we're going to go to welcome and introductions first. We're going back. So we'll go ahead and do the roll call there. And instead of, for the sake of time, we can go ahead to the next slide there. And we'll just pause for a moment to look at all of the stakeholder members. We aren't going to be taking a verbal roll call, but take note of all who are part of this coordinating council And if you wanted to send a message in the chat to let us know you're here, please do so. Thank you. And with that, we want to make sure that our any member of the coordinating council who is representing a state entity has an opportunity to say hello and to offer any updates that you'd like to bring from your agency or your department. And we can go ahead. I'll just look at my screen and I'll call as I see faces, not in any order of priority. We'll go ahead and start with Leslie Morrison. Is there anything you'd like to add, Leslie?
Nothing, just really happy to be a part of this group.
Great, thank you for representing the Department of Developmental Services. Next, I see Dr. Otagon. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Just good morning, everyone. Just hoping everyone's doing well. As you know, although in general, COVID has improved, cases have been creeping up, and so we're watching the numbers very carefully. So hoping everybody stays safe. That's it.
Thank you for being here, Dr. Otagon. And Claire Ramsey is next on my screen from the Department of Social Services.
Hi, thanks so much. We actually have two announcements. First, I'm really excited and sad to announce that Kim Rutledge has been appointed by the governor as the Deputy Director of Legislation and Communications at the California Department of Rehabilitation. And I say sad for us at CDSS, but we're very excited for Kim and know she's going to do a wonderful job. And as many of you know, she has been serving as our APS program liaison for the last few years and has just done a wonderful job and was instrumental in getting this committee up and running. So we want to both thank Kim, congratulate her, and let you all know that we will be looking for a new APS program liaison. So if you know good people, if you think you are a good person, please feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat. And then I also wanted to mention around World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, CDSS is hosting an event on Thursday, June 2nd from 2 to 4, and it will be both an in-person and virtual event. We're doing a hybrid event. And we are going to do a reception to follow for the in-person attendees. And we're partnering with CDA, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, the California Commission on Aging, Empowered Aging, C4A, the California Elder Justice Coalition, and the Child and Family Policy Institute of California. So we're super excited to be able to host this event again and have some in person and have some online. We'll have more details to come. And if anyone's interested in that, please also let me know. So thank you again. Thanks, Susan, for letting me give a few updates.
Thank you, Claire. And we join you in congratulating Kim and thanking her. She was part of this from the outset, and she's been an active leader of this advisory council since before it was even formed and through today. So we will miss Kim in that role, but we're very happy to congratulate her. I see Vance Taylor next. Vance.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just want to provide a quick update on the Cal OES side on two programs. The first is the elder abuse program we have. And the purpose of the program is to continue to enhance the safety of elder and dependent adult victims of abuse, and really to bridge that gap between elder justice service providers and victim service providers. We're in the fourth year of a 5-year funding cycle, and we'll go out for competitive in fiscal 23-24. Expect that RFP to be on our website. The program funding is about $4.6 million, and individual subrecipient allocation is up to $217,000. The second program is our specialized emergency housing program, and that's to expand emergency shelter and emergency housing assistance to provide supportive services for victims of crime with specialized needs, including older adults, individuals with disabilities, and individuals from the LGBTQ+ community that may not be served through traditional sheltering programs. Those individuals will be allowed to choose which supportive services best fit their needs. And the program was designed with older adults victims in mind. That RFP is out now. Proposals are due Monday, May 23rd. And the program funding is $9.6 million with individual subrecipient allocations being up to $300,000. So just want to make sure folks are aware of that and take advantage of those programs.
Thank you, Vance, for that update. We appreciate it. I see that we're also joined by Faye Gordon, representing the Federal Administration on Community Living.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Faye, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. Just happy to be here. And as always, California continues to be such a model. I always love hearing people say, well, we're interested in a master plan on aging, or we're interested in this. And it's like California is already doing these incredible councils, and just available if anyone needs anything from ACL's side on older Americans month activities, or we had preparation, and I'm here to be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Darcy Delgado is representing Secretary Galley in the California Health and Human Services Agency. Darcy, welcome, Darcy. No. And did I miss anybody from the state of California? Oh, Susan Rodriguez with the Department of Aging's Office of the Long-Term Care Patient Representative, and Blanca Castro, California's Long-Term Care Ombudsman, are with us. Linda, welcome, Linda. Please feel free to share any updates if you'd like. Aaron, welcome. Aaron Carruthers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Aaron Carruthers from the California State Council on Developmental Disabilities. One really exciting update that didn't come to pass, but the State Council, along with others, sponsored legislation to have $1.4 billion available for rental assistance for older Californians and Californians with disabilities. That number is a big number. It wasn't the biggest number as it relates to housing, but the conversations related to housing are happening among the governor and top leadership within the legislature. In the end, this is not going forward, but I do want to acknowledge the success of this failure because it was an accomplishment into itself to have a legislation behind rent supports, which we know are critically needed, but leadership has been reluctant to really commit California in that way. So we took a run at it this year, wasn't successful. We'll see what next year brings. Thank you.
Hi, Susan.
Thanks, Aaron. And if anybody else wanted to make comments, otherwise we'll go ahead and move on to our, yep.
Oh, Mr. So Advocate with Southern California and Eat the Shows.
Hi, everybody. It looks like we may have lost Susan. She's kind of frozen up there. So we'll give her a minute to reconnect and just see if there's anybody else who wants from the state side that wants to share updates.
Yes, hello, everybody. Bruce Lem, Healthcare Services. So Healthcare Services Audits and Investigations serves as this state's designated program integrity unit. It's very important for me to note that we work very closely hand in hand with Phil Ferrari, Jennifer Euler of the DOJ, who serves as the state's Medicaid fraud control unit. Obviously, the more eyes and ears on the ground to identify potential areas of concerns with regards to patient harm and elder abuse, the better. We also work very closely with local law enforcement in the event areas of concerns are identified. And finally, DSS, we are proud to serve as a partner with DSS as this is the designated investigative body for this state's in-home supportive services program. So pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last call for updates from our state members. Going once, going twice. Great. Well, let's move to our next agenda item. And Stephanie, I apologize. I am not going to do you justice in an introduction today. I don't have any notes in front of me as I step in for Susan. So I'm just going to spotlight you and let you.
I'm back, Maria. I'm back.
All right, great.
I'm so sorry I got kicked off. I'm traveling today. So just in time to introduce my colleague, Stephanie Welch, the Deputy Secretary of Behavioral Health with the California Health and Human Services Agency. Thank you, Stephanie, for joining us today. Stephanie's been an instrumental leader in the Governor and the Secretary of Health and Human Services Care Court initiative that's moving forward through the legislature and the budget process. And Stephanie's generous enough to provide all of us with an overview and to allow time for question and answer from the audience. So welcome, Stephanie. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's been on my list of things to do to actually observe this particular council. For those of you who don't know me, obviously I'm the Deputy Secretary of Behavioral Health. I'm a social worker by training, and I've been working in this field close to 25 years. So in different positions, representing the counties, working at the state level, representing CBOs. And so it has really been my honor to come and work for Secretary Galley and to support this administration's vision for transforming the behavioral health system. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to take some time. I know I want to keep my slides to 15 minutes so we have time for discussion. So I might not hit all of the items on the slides, but you have them. And I thought, before we talked about the specifics with Care Court, it would be important to also kind of put it into the context of where we are now that we're moving towards the end of the first term of this administration. What did we accomplish? What are we trying to accomplish? This governor came in and said that he was going to make behavioral health across the lifespan and for all Californians a priority. And so it really has been incredible after all this time working in this space to move so fastly and furiously on so many different investments. And I think there's just a real critical recognition, frankly, a recognition that really was led by the legislature for so many decades, but a recognition among the administration that we have critical infrastructure challenges in behavioral health that are, rooted in decades of stigma and discrimination towards people living with behavioral health challenges. And so we have a lot of work to do, but I'm going to hit some of the highlights before we go into Care Court in the next couple of slides. So we recently published a behavioral health needs assessment through our Department of Healthcare Services. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things because the needs assessment really, frankly, cemented what we already knew and isn't an end all be all when it comes to data analysis on the problem. But there were some things that were really striking in the data. One was we need a comprehensive approach to crisis services. And I'm sure that this is a space in which you talk about that particular issue quite a bit. Similar to some comments that were at the top of the hour, we have just a dearth of community-based living options for people with mental illness. And quite frankly, more so people with very serious and persistent mental illness. Long-term housing as well as long-term residential care facilities. On the kids side, we just simply don't have a variety of treatment options for children and youth. This is particularly profoundly missing amongst children who need treatment for substance use disorders. We have not caught up to what we know in terms of the evidence around community defined evidence and culturally appropriate practices. And so we really have a lot of work to do to advance equity. And then lastly, another issue that I'm sure you talk about quite a bit in this space is that for individuals who are justice involved, there is just an incredible amount of enormous challenges, some of them bureaucratic, when it comes to accessing housing, having economic justice, and access to physical healthcare. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we did last year before I talk about some of the proposals this year, including Care Court. This slide really emphasizes this year's investment in our CalAIM justice package, but I can't really underscore how the California Advancing and Innovating Medi-Cal program, which I'm sure you talk about in this space, has really and will change our behavioral health delivery system into one that hopefully is more user-friendly and seamless for individuals who may be experiencing a more mild to moderate condition, and unfortunately that condition deepens and becomes more severe, and they have to access specialty mental health care. And we think that in the long term, this not only will create a more outcomes-based system, but a workforce that is having the opportunity to spend more time caring for people than they have filling out paperwork, etc. So CalAIM could be a different day altogether, but it really is the backbone of changing our ability to provide high quality care to, at least here in California, all of our Medi-Cal beneficiaries. The other one, which is really important and related to CareCourt, is our Behavioral Health Continuum Infrastructure Program and the Community Care Expansion Program, which you probably have talked about both of these. Together, these two programs are bringing $3 billion to invest in community-based care, so care facilities, as well as residential placements, as we recognize some of our most vulnerable and high needs, high risk populations really need to be in long-term residential care. And then we're really excited in a couple of months to fully launch our new peer support service benefit in Medi-Cal, which I think will go a real long way in terms of providing wraparound services to support people with high needs to live in the community. Next slide. So another project I really wanted to emphasize, it's also kind of part of this larger conversation we're having today about the whole crisis care continuum, CareCourt being on that continuum. But CalHope is a crisis counseling program that we actually started, or DHCS launched in response to our California wildfires, and really grew the program under the pandemic. And we will be not only really investigating how to use that in a way that can really reach and serve all Californians, but also how it relates to implementing our 988 transition. So again, bottom line, it's really about being able to create more access and support for people around the state. Next slide. So that was the year before. And so now we focus on this year's investments. First, we really did go through a process after being, frankly, after doing this work for a long time, feeling extremely blessed of having so many funding opportunities. We didn't mention the $4.4 billion going into our kids and youth behavioral health system to really transform how young people access care, in a hope that they will access it sooner in a more timely fashion and get access to high quality care, so that we can address behavioral health issues early on and they don't progress and potentially create, unfortunate or negative outcomes for those who have untreated mental illness as adults. But we really sat down and we thought, okay, we really want to double down. Many of these themes are themes that are consistent with the master plan on aging, but really wanted to double down on addressing the needs of those with the most serious mental health challenges across the agency. That also meant that doubling down on individuals who were justice involved and just simply didn't have equal access to services, immigrants, children, and our aging population. And I think the belief behind this really is, and I will speak for our work that we do in behavioral health and the intersection with criminal justice and in homelessness, is that we believe with the right services and supports that anyone can live in the community. And we are on this mission to make sure that that happens. So I don't want to see my population in continuing to end up in our jails, in our state hospitals, and even in our correctional system here at the state level. That we know how to do it. We just got to figure out how to get it done at the local level. Next slide. So a couple of things that are really going to assist with this. First is we are going to be pursuing creating a Medi-Cal reimbursable benefit for mobile crisis. Really excited about this. Again, lots of different models. There are multidisciplinary models. We know that things are going to look different on a community by community basis, but really have doubled down in making these investments. Last year, we also invested $150 million in actual infrastructure for mobile crisis. So vans, etc. And so really excited to see how that fits into the larger scheme of increasing access and really getting to people sooner, hopefully to prevent crisis in the first place. Our PATH program is really going to give us additional resources to really address the social determinants of health and to really, again, double down on this belief that we believe that even if people have complex needs, they can get the wraparound services and supports that they need in order to live successfully in the community. And so very excited about that as part of this year's and ongoing efforts. Next slide. So I would be remiss, we're certainly getting a lot of feedback in our conversations around Care Court about the workforce crisis in behavioral health. This $1.7 billion investment in the care economy is what we call it, the care economy workforce, which is representative of quite a few behavioral health providers and certainly people who would be working in the space of supporting people to live independently in community-based settings. Is really the overarching theme of this, as well as helping us get to the multilingual and diversity that we need so that our staff and our workforce look like the people that they're serving. And so really excited about this. Obviously, it's not going to immediately result in more skilled workforce, but excited about this initiative, as well as this builds on our $800 million component of behavioral health workforce investments in our kids initiative from last year. Next slide. So couple things to point out here. Really want to emphasize behavioral health bridge housing. We'll talk about it as part of Care Court, but this really is $1.5 billion to address the immediate housing and treatment needs of people experiencing or who are at imminent risk of homelessness with serious behavioral health conditions. This was really intended to give flexible general fund dollars. We love the flexible general fund dollars so that we can work with providers to support them to have the additional clinically enriched services to support somebody living in the community. And also just some creativity for the counties. These are funds that are available over the next 5 years, and we are prioritizing these funds for Care Court recipients. Next slide. So speaking of Care Court, Care Court, we started thinking about a proposal for Care Court late last fall over the winter, and we're really trying to focus on doing something that really was a new approach. And I think many of us for the last several years have been working on initiatives to try to serve, in particular, the justice population. And I think we kind of, and the secretary does a much better job explaining this, but I think many of us said, people shouldn't have to enter the behavioral health system through the jail system. Or through repeat hospitalizations. How could we possibly get and offer services to people before these negative things happen that really result in incarceration and ultimately, in many cases, conservatorship? And so that's kind of some of the principles behind the model that we are proposing. And I think lastly, something that was different, and we'll go to the next slide because it's part of, definitely part of the next slide. Would be that most models that we looked at really only focused on participation coming from the client or the consumer. And that in this case, we really wanted to focus on participation and really accountability coming from both the provider or government and the individual. And it really would be two ways. So I think a couple things I want to hit the highlights on before I kind of walk us through the Care Court process would be some of the reasons why we didn't do, because this is the main question we get, why didn't you reform LPS or why didn't you just fix Laura's Law? And we felt that it was important because what we were trying to accomplish was so different, and it wasn't really quote unquote fixable by making changes to these existing programs. And they each very much have their place, of course. First, as it relates to Laura's Law, we really felt that people needed to be able to directly petition the court. Laura's Law currently is managed through the County Behavioral Health Department. And we felt that it was important to give this opportunity to clinicians, first responders, family members, and that we would build in guardrails to make sure that only credible petitions would be pursued. We also felt that in order to qualify or meet the criteria for care court, you shouldn't have to have documented negative outcomes like repeat hospitalization or repeat jail days, that or at least multiple examples of those. You shouldn't have to have those in order to be considered. We're ultimately really trying to intervene and offer a service prior to those negative things happening. We also felt that it was really critical for local government and participants to be held accountable. Both of them are party to the care court ordered plan. And that was very important to us. And lastly, something that we're really interested in all of your good thinking on is that we created a new role in this collaborative approach to care, which is a supporter role. And that's for an individual to really assist the client or consumer in voicing their interest in their individual care decisions. And then ultimately, prior to leaving care court or whenever it makes sense in the process, everybody's different, create a psychiatric advance directive so that there could be better, the desires of the individual, if they end up in crisis again, are documented and can be facilitated and used by care providers if that is the case, if that does occur. Next slide. So what is the clinical criteria for care court? This is really important to us as we thought about putting something together. We really wanted a clinically driven program that is coupled with a clinical intervention that matches the need of the clinical diagnosis. And so this is a pretty narrow, if not extremely narrow, group of people in our broader array of everybody that we're treating with behavioral health challenges. So the care court criteria requires that the individual have a diagnosis of schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorders, and that whose judgment, which is impaired specifically by the symptoms that someone experiences when they have this condition, lead to a lack of medical decision-making capacity. And so that is very specific and technical, but it is important so that we're getting the right people into care court and we're matching that diagnosis and that set of needs to a care treatment plan. So I say this because I want to be clear that care court is certainly not for everyone experiencing homelessness, and it's most certainly not for everybody experiencing mental illness. And again, there are other options for some of those individuals. This is a very different criteria than Laura's Law. You certainly don't have to have schizophrenia to be considered for assisted outpatient treatment. And we actually, we don't change LPS by any means, and we really rely on existing LPS law as an additional tool for the courts and clinicians to support the care recipient. So I think I'm running out of time, so I think I need to pass through these pretty quickly. This is just a nice visual which kind of shows the pathway through care court, which right now is really outlined as being about a 1-year process. At the 1-year process, the individual can voluntarily request to stay in care court. They may be dismissed. There are other processes in place that might investigate whether or not care court would make sense for another term, but no one would stay in care court any more than 24 months. Let's go to the next slide. So something that's new, and we're really learning about this and excited about the work that's being done to bring supportive decision-making into some of the work that is happening around conservatorship. And so I think we felt that this would be really helpful to create a supporter role. And we're proposing that that role be managed, or that program and the individuals who are employed under that, trained and employed under that program, be managed by our California Department of Aging, to really ensure that the participant understands the process, understands the care pathway, that they're there to use their trained tools to help the individual understand what's going on in the process, and to communicate that, to really act as a tool for the individual to make self-directed choices to the greatest extent possible. And we would also envision this individual helping the individual with their supportive decision-making skills to develop a psychiatric advance directive if the client or consumer wanted one prior to their graduation from care court. Next slide. So real quickly, as a nice segue into your questions, I'm going to talk a little, kind of cover some of the main questions that we get. Why doesn't care court include all behavioral health conditions? As I mentioned before, so I don't want to repeat myself, it's a focused diagnosis with a highly responsive treatment. I think in the last 20 years, what we've learned and the science behind treating, in particular, schizophrenia and schizophrenia spectrum disorders has been tremendous. We really want to leverage that knowledge and implement it. As I've really outlined, this is one intervention for a particular population, whereas, as I shared at the top of the hour, there are lots of other things that we are doing, from little kids to older adults, around improving access to behavioral health for everyone. And then lastly, we feel that there's some concern that we can't do this because the infrastructure investments that we've made so far have not materialized, whether it be workforce or actual facilities. We feel, and maybe many of you see it in your own communities, that we are at a crisis in which we cannot wait any longer. We certainly can't wait for buildings to be built, and that we do have enough resources today. We just have to prioritize to make sure that we're caring for people who we really do believe are at great risk of, frankly, potentially death if they're living on the streets and they don't have any access to care. Next slide. So does care guarantee housing? Housing is a critical housing is a critical component. Obviously, if you're living outdoors in a tent, you have unstable housing, you're unhoused, how could you possibly focus on caring for your behavioral health condition? So it is incredibly important to us. Care plans are required to have a housing plan. That housing is going to look different for different care participants. Of course, they may want a particular kind of housing as well, and that be their particular desire. We have to work with what we have in order to make sure that we can do and make available those options for individuals. As I mentioned before, we are putting $1.5 billion out in bridge housing, and there have been historic investments over the time to prevent and end homelessness. I think we are very eager to work with our city and county partners who kind of we have provided these resources to, in order to ensure that this population and people living with serious behavioral health conditions are being able to be housed with those resources. Next slide. This is a little bit of code for this group, but I know you are the justice group, so you might be familiar with SB 317. And all this really does is that it makes sure that an individual, if they are found incompetent to stand trial on a misdemeanor charge, that the court can refer them to a civil process, which is care court, in order to get their treatment care needs. And so we're very excited about this. We don't want people in criminal court, even if it's diversion, if they can go to a civil proceeding. And so that's what we're designing here. Oh, and the next slide. I'm sorry, I tried to move it forward myself. So what happens if an individual doesn't participate in care court? It's a really good question. if the court determines that someone is not participating, they're not coming to proceedings, they have the authority to just terminate the person from the care program. Again, the court can only utilize existing authority that's granted in LPS to compel that individual. So unlike Laura's Law, where the court has the ability to place the person on a hold so that they can be clinically evaluated, we felt that we would rely on existing LPS. Unfortunately, we do think that if somebody who needs care, they've gone all the way through the clinical evaluation process, and the court has found that this individual meets the criteria for care, this person is experiencing a lot of intense symptoms and is very unwell. And I think our hope is that we can get to them, offer them care. If they do not want the care, we just have to rely on existing authority. Unfortunately, that person may be down the road on a 5150. Unfortunately, that person may end up being incarcerated. We're hoping that that's not the case, but it is possible that that could happen, and that would happen regardless of care court. Regardless of care court. And then this particular piece is something that we're working through. The intent of this was simply to make sure that if somebody had been quote unquote deferred from a conservatorship proceeding to go to care court, that they could go back to that process if they did not want to participate in care court. I think our intent is not to fast track people to conservatorship. So if there are flaws in the language, we're working through that to be clear in that sense. Next slide. I think we're done here. This is just simply to say at agency, we're very interested in creating coordination across departments like this committee to tackle really challenging issues like workforce and homelessness and advancing equity. And so I just wanted to share that that's really, coming from an agency perspective, that's really our role, my role, and I'm excited to be here. And I think the next is just simply a bunch of hyperlinks to help you with any resources. I put care court up at the top, but we also have a behavioral health task force. If you're interested in the Kids Initiative, if you're interested in our Office of Community Restoration and information about CalLink and my information, and then I'm done.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was excellent. And thank you for the resources too. We'll leave these up on the screen, including your email and phone, so that if we run out of time with questions, everybody knows how they can follow up. So we will take questions up until 2 o'clock, and we will take them first from council members. So I see that Ellen Schmeeding has her hand raised. Ellen, we'll let you please go first.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I found that to be extremely interesting and a probable intervention that may pan out. Here in San Diego, we looked at Laura's Law for quite some time and other alternatives to conservatorship. The one point I'll make is just that as you talked about a lot of the services that you're providing, and there's so much going on with behavioral health, I would just encourage you to consider what more can be done for older adults. They don't figure prominently in your presentation today, and the California Commission on Aging is right now putting forward a budget proposal for a geriatric behavioral health leadership position. We'd like to see that advocacy occur. And I do know, the fastest growing group of homeless are older adults, and I know that's a big intersection with the care court. So having that older adult expertise at the table and also looking at other interventions for older adults. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking for other raised hands among council members.
Howard McBroom.
Yes, I do have a question for Stephanie.
Okay, Howard McBroom.
Yes. I do have a question for Stephanie. How many people are currently in conservatorship at the present moment? And do you feel that support decision-making can help make a difference in reducing the number of people who are currently under conservatorship?
Those are good questions. I was going to see in my handy cheat sheet here if I actually did have the number of people who are on conservatorship. Let me answer the first one and see if I can find it, and I can always put that number in the I'm sorry, the chat. So I was so focused on wanting to find that number. Can you repeat, or Susan, could you paraphrase the second part of his question?
I think we may have lost Susan again. So Howard, I don't know if you can step in.
Sorry, Howard.
Yes, I just wanted to know whether she thinks that supported decision-making could help reduce the number of people currently in conservatorship.
You know, Howard, I am just learning about supportive decision-making myself. And so I don't want to pontificate that maybe that is the case, but certainly the research would show that. And, you know, I'm very eager to learn more and excited that there is such support for supportive decision-making, and trying to see how we can use it more in the behavioral health space, which it hasn't necessarily, to the best of my knowledge, been used as much. So very interested to learn more.
The reason I asked that question is because Judy Mark of Disability Voices United is very interested in reducing the number of people in conservatorship and in finding alternatives to being conserved. And she would be a good person for you to contact if you want to learn more about it. Judy Mark at Disability Voices United.
Okay, great. I actually think that we might even have a call on the books for next week. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. Good luck.
And Stephanie, unless I am mistaken, I'm not aware of any entity that collects the data on how many conservatorships there are statewide, because there are a lot of private conservatorships, both probate and LPS, and I'm not aware of any entity right now that collects data on all the conservatorships in the state.
Yeah. Thank you, Scarlett. I think the only numbers that I have would be specific to LPS conservatorships. But I do have here, the most recent data we have is through 2019, and temporary conservatorships were just shy of 1,400, and permanent conservatorships were around 4,400. And Scarlett would know much better than I as to the level, the quality of that data in terms of its accuracy. I think one thing I would say just real quickly, we were meeting this morning just on this topic, and I would say that we really do agree that it would be really important for us to figure out strategies to improve that data so that we're really making informed decisions. And just wanted to express our support for really trying to roll up our sleeves and figure out what's the best way to do that. And if we don't get it in this legislative session, then we have some more time and we can work on it next year. But just wanted to express our interest in that space.
Thank you. We're going to go to Sherry, then Liz, and Scarlett. I don't know if you have a question or you just wanted to jump in that conversation, but we'll circle back to you. And then after that.
Oh, sorry. I already made my comment. I'll lower. Sorry.
Got it. Thank you. So Sherry, then Liz. Sherry, go ahead.
Hi, Stephanie. Good afternoon. Great information. I have a son with autism, and we've used supportive decision-making with him since he was a very young man. And I've found that sometimes people don't respect that supportive decision-making process when we use it with him. Do you think when the care court start practicing that, will it be respected, or is there a way that you can make sure that the person's decision is actually, followed through with and respected?
Yeah, great comment. I think there are a couple of components. I feel like sometimes people aren't getting the entire whole picture with care court, because we have components that are the funding to support the implementation of Care Court that will be released as part of our May revise. But certainly one of the things we recognize is that there's a significant amount of technical assistance that needs to take place, not only to understand what we're trying to accomplish, but really to understand, for example, support, like I mentioned, I've been around for a long time. Supportive decision-making is new in my space. We've got lots of questions about why do we need supportive decision-making if we have peer support, and what's the difference? And there's just a lot of education that needs to take place, including with our courts and our court partners. So there will be a component in the May revise that will outline some of our thinking around there, but certainly would welcome partnership with this committee and others to think through strategies in that space as well.
Thank you very much. And lastly, we'll go to Liz. Go ahead, Liz.
Hi, Stephanie and panelists. My name is Liz Logston. I am with Disability Rights California, and I'm sure you already know this, Stephanie, but Disability Rights California is opposed to the Care Court framework as it's currently structured and described, because it doesn't guarantee housing as a solution to address homelessness, and that the housing opportunities would currently be provided through the counties. And we just feel that a housing first approach is the best way to address the concerns of the folks that we serve, and that we would strongly prefer intensive voluntary outpatient treatment as opposed to court-ordered treatment. And I also wanted to share that one of our, we have a coalition of organizations that are taking these same positions. One of those organizations is Justice and Aging, and there is a panelist member from Justice and Aging as part of this group, but she's not here today. I'm not speaking on behalf of her, but I just wanted to share that, potentially she would have that perspective as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And I see that we have a question from Carla in the chat. Is Care Court relevant only to people with severe mental health diagnosis, or is this related to dementia diagnosis as well?
Yeah, thank you for the question. No, very specifically, Care Court, and this has come up, this is very specifically, Care Court is directed at individuals with schizophrenia or schizophrenia spectrum disorders, including psychotic disorders. Now, I do know that there are ways in which people can experience psychosis that's related to another underlying medical condition. I'm not an expert on dementia, but I know one of the things we're really exploring right now is how to, quote unquote, be inclusive, but also, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to psychotic, people experiencing psychosis, but not necessarily because of a mental illness. That could be drug-induced psychosis, it could be medically induced psychosis. And I'm not saying that that's the situation with dementia, because I'm not an expert in that space. But what I would say is that, we're trying to strike the balance with our medical and clinical experts to, yes, be inclusive, because many of them are the same symptoms, but at the same time, ultimately getting that individual to the right care. Because what we've designed is an intervention on the other end that's really for somebody who has a serious and persistent mental illness, rather than somebody who may have a serious medical condition or a serious substance use disorder. And so we're working through some of those details right now.
Thank you, Stephanie. And with that, I think we will pivot to our next agenda item. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Appreciate you being here. Just want to check in and see if, Susan, you were able to reconnect. I know we've been having some connectivity issues as you're participating remotely and traveling today.
I believe I'm working right now. So thank you again, Stephanie. Thank you for being so generous with your time. We know how hard you are working with so many others on this and all of the items that you shared with us in your slide deck to educate us that Care Court is just a piece of a much bigger continuum, and there's activity happening on many fronts. So thank you for joining us. We're now going to turn over to the first presentation. I want to just underscore how significant this is, that this is only the second meeting of this council, and we already have two presentations being brought forward by members of the Advisory Council. And today we're so happy to be hearing first from Nina Musavi, who will be sharing on behalf of all of the members who contributed. I believe this work was led by Vivian with Justice and Aging, and she's not able to be with us today. Nina will be presenting on behalf of their work group about the equity framework. Welcome, Nina.
Hey, Susan, thank you so much.
Hi there.
Apologies, I'm not going to be on video. I'm actually sick. I think you can tell by my voice. So I'm sparing everybody the visual of me and I will talk through and you'll get to see the lovely slides that Vivian put together. She unfortunately was not able to join us today, but I do want to underscore that the work that I will be talking about today was largely led and spearheaded by Vivian. And I want to make sure that she gets the proper credit for the work, even though she's not the one who will be presenting. So if we could go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what our charge and our goal was as we were putting together these principles and this equity tool. And I want to make sure to mention that these are draft principles and a draft tool. We are proposing this now to the larger council, and I believe Susan and her team will decide how we want to move forward with adopting it. But just as a little bit of a recap, during the first council meeting that we had a couple months ago, the Equity and Inclusion Subcommittee was created, and we were created to explore how the council can integrate equity principles into our work throughout the next couple of months, throughout the year, and moving forward. And so since that first meeting, our Equity Subcommittee met 3 times to develop a draft equity framework for the council to review and hopefully adopt. During our first subcommittee meeting, we decided to create these principles and pair them with an equity tool to help guide the council's work and really center equity in everything that we do. I know that for all of the organizations that we represent, we have been internally working to see how we can center equity and inclusion and diversity, equity and inclusion in our work. And we wanted to emanate that as well through the council. So what I'll be presenting today are these proposed principles and the tool for your review and discussion. So if I could go to the next slide. So we have put together 5 equity principles and 2 kind of major tools, right? The principles and the equity tool document. So as we go over these principles were really what we used to drive the creation of the tool as well. So our first principle is that we recognize that all adults deserve to live free from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We also acknowledge the existence of systemic racism and discrimination and its negative impacts. And in order to combat those impacts, we must center equity at all stages of our council's work. Centering equity means not just creating equitable solutions for all older adults and adults living with disabilities, but also recognizing that implicit biases exist within all of us. And we are committed as a group to acknowledge and explore biases while doing the work of this council. Next slide, please. And the last 2 principles that we have here is that we acknowledge that while older adults and adults living with disabilities have many overlapping interests, they are distinct communities, and any policies examined by this council should examine impacts to each community. Finally, we recognize the importance of hearing directly from older adults and adults living with disabilities as we complete our work. Their lived experiences should always be centered in our work. So those are the 5 equity principles that we used to drive this second part of our work, which was creating this equity tool. And if you could go to the next slide, please. What we did was we put together a series of questions that we wanted to be able to answer. And these questions are what comprise this equity tool. So we are hoping that in all of the work that we do moving forward, we stop to take a pause to ask ourselves these questions and make sure that we are answering them to the best of our abilities. And if we are not able to answer them, we are taking a moment to step back and seek those answers. So using the MPA equity tool and other available tools, we actually developed this series of questions. And we believe that these questions should be used in all 3 stages of our processes here. So whether it's the planning stage, the program development stage, or the policy making stage, we want to make sure we're stepping back and asking these questions. So the first question that we put forward is, what is the problem? What problem or issue is the proposed policy, program, or action intended to address? And then the next question would be, how does it address DEI? And for those who are not familiar with this acronym, DEI means diversity, equity, and inclusion. You might often see it used in pairing with the acronym REI, which means racial equity and inclusion. So this question, if we dive more deeply, it looks at, does the proposed policy address gaps and or organizational barriers? And does it further our goals of increased diversity, equity, and inclusion? If it does not do this, how can we make sure that it does? Next, we look at who benefits from this proposed solution, and are those groups harmed? So who is the intended beneficiary of the proposed policy? And are there groups that may possibly be harmed by the policy? And how do we plan to mitigate that harm? We could go to the next slide, please. So then we would be looking at, what is the available data? Is there available data on the policy's impact on these marginalized groups? And have reasonable efforts been made to discover any available data and identify any data gaps? Then we would want to look at the historic impacts. How has systemic racism and or discrimination, in essence, ageism, sexism, ableism, etc., impacted current policies, and how will this new policy address those past harms? Next slide, please. And the last 2 questions that we would be asking, are there differences in these distinct communities? So as you may remember in our principles, we did identify these distinct communities. So we want to make sure in our equity tools that we're asking ourselves this question. Are there differences in how disabled and older adult communities may be impacted? Are there differences in these distinct communities, and are we addressing them? And then lastly, are we getting community input? What efforts have been made, or which efforts are needed to ensure that the perspective and needs of those marginalized stakeholders are reflected in planning or program and policy development? We always want to make sure that we are first doing no harm. And if we are not getting community input from the folks who are actually directly impacted, these marginalized stakeholders, then we may intentionally be unintentionally be doing harm. So we always want to make sure that their voice is heard. So those are the two proposed items that we bring to you today from our equity subcommittee. Those are the equity principles and the equity tools. And I do welcome questions, but I will say that as I am not the leader of the subcommittee, I might not be able to answer all of the questions. And if there is a question I don't have an answer to, I'll make sure that Vivian is able to get back to you with it. And I turn it back over to Susan to take it to the next step.
Thank you so much, Nina. And thank you to Vivian in absentia, and I believe Sherry, Liz, Diana, Howard, Astrid, and Claire all contributed to this work. So thank you. We have a few minutes for questions, and Nina and members of the work group can field those questions. In terms of process, you're seeing this for the first time today, so we will, it's been circulated, but we'll give you a period of time where all of you can individually comment back to us, and then we'll bring it forward at the next meeting as well, probably to consider it for adoption after we have an opportunity to hear from all of you. We don't expect you to be able to turn it around that quickly today. Are there any questions for the work group or comments? Marty.
Hi, thanks, for that presentation. I really appreciate it and support the points that were made. I have one question though regarding what is the work group recommending in terms of steps when the stakeholder, the various communities need help in making changes? Because I come from an Asian community. And it's really important to understand, one thing that people need, I think we have to be reminded that everyone needs to step up and change. And there are values within each of our communities that could be viewed as reprehensible. For instance, some communities view people who are gay, they're culturally going back, to their home countries in ways that is not acceptable, and is certainly not acceptable in this country. There are Asian cultures that traditionally the older age might view people with disabilities in a certain way. In the Japanese culture, there's a shame factor that is very huge. Now, my parents did not do that with my sister, but that was just, for whatever reasons, they didn't do that. They always included her. But a lot of Asian cultures, the shame factor is huge. And I just think that we got to recognize that people need to change, and there's religious cultures also that have views about women that are reprehensible. At least that's how I would feel, in terms of their views now. And I think we have to recognize that just because someone's coming from a different culture doesn't mean that culture is something that needs to be embraced completely, that we have to be in a teaching mode, all of us together. And so I don't know if your work group looked into that, or maybe it's beyond that work group or something.
So I really appreciate that comment, Marty. And I am a child of immigrants. My parents are Iranian.
So
So I know. And I think that was something we did talk about in creating these principles. And that's how we came up with principle number 3, which was that we are recognizing that everybody has implicit biases, and that those exist within all of the communities. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think it's not often that we recognize that even folks within marginalized communities have their own implicit bias. And for my work at the Alzheimer's Association, one of the things we tackle is breaking into communities of color and taking away that stigma around folks living with Alzheimer's or dementia, and that's something to be ashamed of. So yeah, absolutely, we're right there with you. And I think this is a launching point for us. And as we start working with different marginalized groups, things will be, we will all be learning things and kind of learning how to tackle those various implicit biases.
Perfect answer. See, you can answer all the questions.
Great. We'll take a final question from Howard, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Well, actually, not so much a question as a comment. I do feel that we need to have more people from the disabled community and from the elderly community represented in the decision-making process. I feel that's very important. That's why I'm here on this committee. I am both a disabled person and an elderly person. I'm 66 years old. And I feel and I also acquired a Blanchard Resource Center and employ an Easter Shield and associate Easter Shield. So I feel I sort of have a, foot in both camps, foot in both doors. And I feel I can contribute by making my perspective known. And I feel we should be guided by the principle of nothing for us without including us as well. So I call for more people from the elderly community and from the people with disability community to be included in the state decision-making processes. I feel their voice needs to be heard too.
Thank you, Howard. And I saw that reflected in the work of the work group, and we'll be coming to you to help identify other individuals who could be involved. We may need your help to achieve that goal. We share that goal. And now I'll turn it over to Maria.
Thank you, Susan. There's that mute button again. We're going to turn to public comment. We have just a couple of minutes for public comment, and I know there are a couple of folks who have dropped things into the Q&A, so I will read those off. But in the meantime, I do want to encourage participants who are joining us today to either use that raise hand feature or engage with us through the Q&A, and we'll kind of read your comments or questions aloud. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I think the two questions that have been submitted thus far tie together, and they're really for Stephanie. I don't know, Stephanie, if you're still on, but this is from Luan, who asks, can you speak to the importance of medication with respect to schizophrenia and the impact it has on an individual's capacity for decision-making? Does the Health and Human Services Department explored how medication like the shot can be brought to this population, such as through street doctors, as one way of getting help without more burdensome process? And furthermore, does the state have capacity to identify every person who has schizophrenia and whether they are currently on medication or not? Does the state have capacity to identify those the locations of these individuals to send a team of professionals who can come to them and offer the medications and other forms of assistance? So thank you, Luan. And just looking to see if there's any other hands raised, questions, comments. Great. Well, I think at this point we will take a little bit of a pause and get our stretches in, get up and move around, and we will be back in about 15 minutes at 2:30. Thank you, everybody.
Marie?
Yes, sir.
Marie, we're taking a break.
Lisa.
Hi, Susan. Wanted to let you know I was here.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Where are you meeting us from?
I am in LA to go to the 50th anniversary celebration of justice and aging tonight.
Oh, wonderful.
So, yeah.
You'll be seeing Vivian.
Yes, yes.
So I've been, we're a little worried we might go over a little bit. I don't know how we're doing on time.
Well, we'll just adapt. And Leslie,
Okay,
thank you for joining Lisa for this portion. We also may interrupt you. Did you hear that Andy Imperato may join us out of order for one of the other agenda items? I think it shouldn't impact you. We might just pause and resume. It won't take away from your time.
Okay. Okay. And Carol has assured me she doesn't need as much time as she has, so we should be able to catch up.
It will all work out.
Great. And I am popping in to call the meeting back to order as it's 2:30. So Susan, I'm going to spotlight you and then you can kind of take over from here.
All right, I hope you stretched your legs and got something to drink. And now we're returning for the second half of our agenda. And we are honored to have a second presentation from a second work group that's been busily working since our first meeting. For those who've not yet met Lisa Narenberg, who heads up the California Elder Justice Coalition. And you heard Leslie Morrison introduce herself earlier from the California Department of Developmental Disabilities. Lisa and Leslie and many others have been working together on the landscape and gap analysis. So I turn the agenda over to you now. Thank you both.
Great. Well, thanks, Susan. Hi, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to present today. I also really want to thank my fellow committee members for some really enlightening and thoughtful discussions. I've really gotten a lot out of them. And thanks also to the CDA staff who've really helped us move forward on this. So if we could go to the first slide. This fills out the tasks that were assigned to us, basically to gather information and conduct a gap analysis. And these are the data points that we started looking at, just the basics: type of abuse, lead agencies. We actually started working on a chart that CDA originally got started on, and Leslie's has developed kind of a simplified version of that, which she's going to show you in a few minutes. If I could go to the next slide. So this first slide, well, I want to say first, our group really had a little bit of trouble defining our tasks and getting started. It's a great group that was very engaged, but people had kind of different priorities. Some people really wanted to focus on identifying the key state agencies, so that as this council moved forward, that we knew that we'd have all the right people at the table. And that's really no small task in itself, just getting a lay of the land. But there was also a real concern by a number of people that we really, as we looked at the state structure, that we stay focused at the local level as well. Really making sure that we kept in mind consumers and how consumers were going to benefit from our actions. Some people wanted to kind of come up with almost a protocol or a map for how consumers could get help in this process. So we weren't able to get to all of these concerns, but I think we are hoping to continue meeting and to get to some of them a little bit later. So we started out again by charting kind of the lay of the land that put together some of that data. And you can see that it's color coordinated thanks to Amanda and Blanca, who went through it and helped us break down between these agencies, between the human services agencies and kind of the ones that deal with consumer protection. So right off the bat, as we started looking at who was on the committee, we identified a couple of missing agencies. Some of us really felt that we needed to involve the courts in this process. In working in elder abuse, you're not going to get very far without involving the courts. And so we recommended including the Judicial Council, which oversees courts. And the other missing agency was missing because it doesn't exist. And that's a public agency to oversee public guardians, public conservators, and public administrators. And these groups are really vital to elder justice because they defend the rights of people who lack decision-making capacity. So in the case of public guardians, that includes people with dementias and brain injuries. With public conservators, it's defending the rights of people with behavioral health problems. And with public administrators, it's defending the rights of the deceased, making sure that their wishes and their legacies are respected. So a lot of us have actually over the years advocated for a state office of the public guardian administrator and PC, I get these mixed up, PA, PG, and PC. It's always a mouthful. I think we've seen how our APS liaison how important that position has been. You know, Kim Rutledge, who we're going to be sorry to have leave, and her predecessor, Lori Delegrammaticus, have, I think, really improved coordination at the state level between DSS, CDA, Cal OES, and the advocacy community, as well as with adult protective service programs around the state. And they've also been able to apply for and get federal funding for innovation. So it's been really valuable, I think, to our state to have that position. The problem is when you have talented people like Kim and Lori, they get taken away. So hopefully we'll have another person who can achieve that level. Can I have the next slide? Now, because in elder abuse, our reporting system is so central to the work that goes on at the local level, we kind of focused on the three agencies. Actually, it's more than three agencies that are the most directly involved in the reporting process. So at the local levels, as you know, adult protective services, ombudsman, police, and sheriffs are the first responders in most abuse reports. And so their counterparts at the state level appear in that yellow circle. It includes APS, which is within the Department of Social Services, who coordinate adult protective services at the local level. And again, they're coordinated by the liaison position there. The long-term care ombudsman, which is in the California Department of Aging, responds to abuse in long-term care facilities. And I want to point out that California is really one of just a handful of states in the country where the ombudsman actually investigate cases under their state mandatory reporting laws. It's a topic that's been kind of controversial. Some have questioned whether or not you can be an advocate and an investigator if those roles are compatible. It's just something to keep note of. While we don't have a state agency that coordinates local law enforcement, the Division of Medicare Fraud and Elder Abuse in the Department of Justice, which you heard about earlier, prosecutes civil and criminal cases, and also sometimes collaborates with local law enforcement. Local law enforcement obviously investigates complaints of abuse that rise to the level of being criminal conduct. And a lot of our members have worked closely with the Operation Guardian, which was a group that worked with local law enforcement to investigate and respond to cases in skilled nursing facilities. It was a terrific resource. I'm not sure how large a role that has today, maybe something we can be looking at. Investigating in abuse cases obviously isn't the only role that these groups play. CDA, as you know, administers elder abuse funds, and Susan talked about that earlier. That includes funds that are used for World Awareness or California Elder and Disability Rights Awareness Month. CDA also funds senior legal services, which are extremely important player in elder abuse prevention. They also, within the office, have a legal services developer who responds to unmet legal needs. And there are certainly a lot of unmet legal needs in our state. So we're really delighted that Jeremy has expressed interest in trying to increase the role of the services developer. DSS, in addition to APS, also operates Home Safe, which we've heard about already, which is a homelessness prevention program. And a lot of victims of elder abuse face the prospect of homelessness as a result of elder abuse. People, taking their money and becoming evicted as a result of the abuse. Community care licensing is another agency within the Department of Public Health, Department of Social Services, which I'll come back to in a couple of minutes. But moving outward in that circle away from those three main agencies are regulation, oversight, and licensing. And these are agencies that really focus on abuse by professionals and institutions. And as you can see, there are a lot of them. They focus on abuse through things like training, licensing, certification, or by punishing abusers through things like fines, revoking their licenses, or decertifying them, or cutting public funds. Sometimes when we hear people talk about Medicare or Medi-Cal fraud, we think of the government as the victim. But when facilities that get these funds mistreat the people that they serve, or they provide inadequate care, it's considered fraud because the government isn't getting the services that they're paying for. So it's not just a matter of defrauding the government. People at the ground level are affected by it. So some of these entities in the outer circle are also directly involved in the mandatory reporting system. For example, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman works closely with two oversight groups. It reports to community care licensing, which is also in DSS, as I mentioned, and it licenses residential care facilities. They also do reviews and audits and investigate abuse and neglect. Ombudsmen also report to the Licensing and Certification Division in DPH, Department of Public Health, which conducts annual surveys of nursing homes that serve Medicare and Medi-Cal beneficiaries, and they also investigate complaints. So they can do things like issue citations, require plans of protection, and impose monetary penalties. Now, the Department of Consumer Affairs also plays a really important role, which Achilles told me about. I wasn't aware of. I've only been in this field for 40 years, and I'm still learning things. That's how complicated it is. Maybe it's them, or maybe it's me, or maybe it's the system. But these other agencies that receive reports are mandated to report to DCA abuse that's committed by licensees of the healing arts, which includes physicians, nurses, social workers, and it also investigates folks pretending to be physicians, nurses, and social workers. So it's a very important component of the reporting system. So I want to also mention cross-reporting at the local level because it's reflected at the state level as well. And I think is something this group needs to really kind of keep in focus. At the local level, there's a system of cross-reporting between these agencies that I just mentioned that's really complicated and confusing. Some of the issues I think that need to be some of those issues I think we may want to look at the state level, and hopefully we'll talk more about them in our committee or another group. But just to give you an example, under cross-reporting, APS sends reports to local law enforcement as part of their responsibilities. And it's my understanding that sometimes those reports go to law enforcement even before they've been substantiated. And so we really don't even know how they're being handled across the state by local law enforcement. And I was just thinking, as considering the equity and inclusion group's principles, it seems like we really should take a look at some of these practices from a social justice and an equity and inclusion lens, because to really understand whether or not some of the practices we're using discourage some groups from reporting abuse. So other departments in the outer circle, I'm just going to mention very briefly, the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, which I believe is not on the council, oversees banks, credit unions, money transmitters, finance companies, and on and on. So it's very important to have those organizations involved in some way to address elder abuse. The Department of Insurance investigates violations of insurance laws and regulations. They're looking mostly at agents and brokers, and sometimes they can get money back for victims. So that's a very important program. They also do training about fraud and public information. The Department of Healthcare Services focuses on abuse and quality control for Medi-Cal beneficiaries or groups, entities that receive funding from those groups. And they focus on fraud, waste, and abuse, and patient harm, which includes elder abuse and abuse of people with disabilities. I'm going to turn things over to Leslie now to show the chart that I just mentioned and to talk about some of the agencies that serve the younger disabled population.
Hi, I'm Leslie Morrison. I'm with the Department of Developmental Services. The other two agencies that were on the chart were the Department of Developmental Services and the Department of State Hospitals. And I do believe there's a representative here from the Department of State Hospitals. Our two departments are unique in that we are also service providers. So we do operate facilities in which we provide services, and we have a law enforcement division that is on the grounds of those facilities that receives reports of abuse and neglect that we investigate or partner with outside law enforcement agencies to investigate. We also are provided with some technical assistance by a division at agency called the Office of Law Enforcement Support, and they assist in investigations. The Department of Developmental Services also has some oversight into abuse and neglect incidents that occur in facilities, and we partner with community care licensing to ensure that those are adequately investigated. If I could just share my screen for a minute. Part of what we've learned in our process here is that it looks like we have a lot of bubbles covered, and yet those of us that are working in this division know that there are gaps in the system that don't appear with this display. So we've started putting together a very rudimentary Excel spreadsheet, and perhaps I'm not going to be able to share it with you, but to try to show what are the jurisdictions of all of these different state agencies, and eventually adding the jurisdiction of the local agencies, including, do they only serve elders? Do they serve elders and people with disabilities? Do they have statewide oversight, or is their oversight local? What kinds of abuse are they specifically covering? Many state agencies cover all manners of abuse, but some of them only have a little piece of the puzzle. Like the Department of Consumer Affairs is really interested in the licensing of individual providers. The one that had to do with insurance really is talking about financials. So taking a look at, are they discrete in the kinds of abuse or neglect that they cover? We have another category about whether the incidents rise to a level of being criminal in nature, or whether they're more related to civil or case management issues. Certainly, we all know that abuse of elders and dependent adults is a crime under the penal code, but many times it's handled through administrative channels. And then finally, we're looking at whether the jurisdiction of all of the involved agencies is limited to only people that are in licensed facilities, or whether it extends to people living in the community. So we're just beginning to put this chart together. The charge of our group was to map the landscape, but I think part of that is also mapping where there are gaps. And we're hoping that by layering all of these different responsible entities together, we're going to be able to notice where there are gaps. One of the other things we talked about is a gap that we all know is communication. And I think Lisa talked about that earlier. We have a lot of entities that are involved, but I think we all recognize that one of the challenges is the sharing of information and collaboration. So not quite sure where that's going to land on our landscape display, but we are keenly aware that that is one of the gaps in our system, is us partnering together, sharing information together, and reducing those communication gaps, so folks don't fall between the gaps in the system. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Leslie. I said this has been a real learning experience. You know, the elder abuse and the disability rights networks have really not worked that well in the past. So this committee has really provided an opportunity for us to get to know each other. So it's great to learn about these services. So can we go back? I wanted to mention the two sidelined services that just kind of didn't fit into either circle. That includes the Judicial Council of California, which I mentioned earlier. I think, you know, we saw in the last couple of months why their involvement and the involvement of the courts is so important in elder justice, elder and disability justice. A lot of people have been calling for conservatorship reform for many years. And this just earlier this year, there's the bill AB 1194 that directs the Judicial Council to complete a comprehensive review of our conservatorship system by January 1st, 2024. And I think, as we saw earlier, there's a lot of interest in looking at things like supported decision-making and how, if there are alternatives to conservatorship. A couple of months ago, the Administration for Community Living released an RFP for $1 million for states to review and enhance their conservatorship systems with stakeholder impact. And it required the participation of the state Supreme Court, APS, and Ombudsman. And we were really delighted to see that CDA and DSS were interested, and CDA invited representatives from the Judicial Council to meet to talk about the RFP and about this council, the coordinating council. Unfortunately, there wasn't time to apply for grants, so we weren't able to take advantage of an opportunity to bring consumers' voices into that process. Hopefully that's something that we can continue anyway. I think that there was some interest in moving ahead on that, even without the grant funding. The other group that's listed kind of on the sidelines is the Office of Emergency Services. We heard about some of their great work earlier today. I think, you know, I want to point out that this is another program that in other states doesn't, these are groups that administer VOCA funds, Victims of Crime Act funds. And in most states, groups, the VOCA administrators are within other departments, usually attorney generals or Department of Justices at the state level. So I think here in California, we have a bit of a challenge making sure that we have those relationships with the Office of Emergency Services. They are a major funder now of multidisciplinary teams in the state, legal services. Our presenter earlier mentioned some of the RFP opportunities that are out there. I don't know if I didn't catch whether he mentioned there's an RFP out right now for shelters from the Office of Emergency Services. And one of their priority areas is elders. And we know that that's a really strong unmet need in the state. So being able to get that information, to coordinate with the other agencies so that we get that information to other people around the state is so important. So there's just so many reasons why we need an elder and disability justice coordinating council. So if we can go to the next slide. We also started looking at advocacy networks because they really play a very important part in elder and disability justice initiatives around the state. So here are some that are represented here on the council. We also have identified some other groups that we think would be important, and I think we'll continue to do that and would welcome input from this group in doing that. And it's not that we want to continue to invite new people. We know that there was a very thoughtful and deliberative process in coming up with the members of this committee. We don't necessarily want to increase that. But there are some groups that really are very important in promoting justice that we might want to think about. Let's go on to the next slide. I was actually just speaking, California Elder Justice Coalition is one of 15 state elder justice coalitions across the country. So we talk to each other, and I was just talking to somebody recently about their coordinating council, and they have a category of affiliates, and these are agencies and groups that are not necessarily on the council, but that are available for consultation. Maybe that's something that we would want to think about. Some of those groups include folks like the professional and trade associations, training institutes like POST, Police Officer Standards and Training, which are so important here in California. Financial institutions play an enormous role in abuse prevention, hopefully, and also MDTs. And it's great that we have, we're going to be hearing some more about MDTs. So I'll go to our last slide, which is just kind of our to-do list of unfinished business. We do want to continue to add to our list of advocacy groups and state groups that have a role to play, because we haven't, I don't think we've fleshed out all of them yet. We want to map local services by category. I think, if we hopefully we'll be able to come back next time and have a better lay of the land of local programs, which was very important to our members of our group. Also to be able to identify more problems in coordination. I'm sure all of you have lots of them, and identify information needs, which is something that I'm actually taking notes at this meeting, thinking of information needs. For example, the number of conservators that we have, looking at outcomes in mandatory reporting from an equity perspective. So those are kind of the areas that we've been talking about. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to represent a great working group. So thanks.
Thank you, Lisa and Leslie. And I appreciated what you said. This is just the start. So I'm just impressed by how far you brought this in a short period of time. But I see there are many more boxes to add and then to fill in beneath. So thank you for that. We have time for any comments or questions from the members of the coordinating council.
We have a question from Tony Anderson in the chat. In the slides with the circles, the inner circle was labeled as mandated reporters. Those aren't the only departments that are mandated reporters, right?
Yep, Tony, this is Leslie. I'll respond to that question. I think what was intended was that the ones in the inner circle are the ones that respond to mandated abuse reports, not that they are mandated reporters. So those are the entities that have the responsibility of responding to mandated abuse reports.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions or comments?
Maria, this is Blanca. And I just, on the council, I just wanted to share that working with Lisa and all of the experts on this work group, which was just the landscape work group, what we really learned is just how daunting this task is of identifying what exactly everybody is doing, who they're serving. And so we have to fill a lot more of the fields, like how are they being funded, and then is there where are the gaps? And I think we've already identified, and who else are we missing, not just with the advocates but with other departments. So we are going to need, I think, a little more time as we're just trying to organize this in a fashion that will be useful, so that we can then start focusing in on where those gaps may lie.
Thank you, Blanca. Ellen.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was really informative, and I like the display as well. The one thing you mentioned that really got my attention was about communication. And I know we worked so hard for years with Adult Protective Services on the multidisciplinary team effort to be able to communicate on really tough elder abuse situations. Is there any type of communication occurring among all these agencies now that is similar or could be desirable?
Are you talking about at the local level, Ellen, or at the state level?
At the state level, all those organizations that you showed, I'm thinking that at the local level, you could get somebody on the line to participate in an MDT around a specific situation. But are they communicating now, or is this council really the first opportunity we have to bring the groups together to look at what's needed?
I think this is really the first, in my career of people coming together at the state level, which is why we're so excited about it. And, I think you'll be hearing in a moment about how local communities through their multidisciplinary teams are, struggling with issues of coordination and communication. But we needed players at the state level for them to be communicating with, and we want to see those kinds. There really has been a gap in coordination among the state agencies.
And this is Leslie again, if I could just chime in, I agree. In my career, I don't know of any such an effort like we're having here. The other thing I would say, Ellen, is I think that those local efforts do exist for elders, but at the local level, those kinds of teams don't really exist for people with disabilities. So I believe that they're elder review teams and child review teams, but there aren't review teams that cover abuse and neglect of people with disabilities who fall outside of those two categories. Locally, some jurisdictions have included cases involving people with disabilities, but it is more of the exception than the rule.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
It looks like our next guest has arrived, Maria. Oh, we're gonna go out of order if Carol doesn't mind. We're gonna switch things up just a little bit, and we're going to hear first from Andy Imperato. And this would be the agenda item focused on the September 20th convening, which is a fantastic segue for what we just heard in terms of where you are with the landscape. And I imagine that as you are mapping all of the state programs, state departments and programs, and building out that circle, I'm sure that issues are bubbling up that are priorities that keep recurring. So I'm pleased now to introduce to you a member of the Impact Committee. And Impact is the Oversight Committee for the Master Plan for Aging. And Andy Imperato is the Executive Director of Disability Rights California. He served on the Master Plan for Aging Stakeholder Advisory Committee. He's been a major contributor to all of the work, and he continues to lead our work as a member of the Impact Committee. Andy joined us in the middle of the Master Plan for Aging. He came to California after a very distinguished career in Washington, D.C. We're so lucky to have Andy here working in our state, working statewide for Disability Rights California. And he's going to update this council as one of 7 stakeholder groups that feed into the Master Plan for Aging. So Andy, thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. And I'm going to turn the screen over to you now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Susan. And Susan, am I right that you or Sarah are going to tag team this a little bit with me, depending on how the conversation goes?
Yes, we are here.
Okay.
We're both here.
And by the way, happy birthday, Susan. I think yesterday was your birthday, but if I'm remembering that from Facebook, happy birthday.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm one of the folks that is serving on the Impact Committee, which is implementing the Master Plan for Aging in California together. We were asked to do a report to the state, to the California Department of Aging and other state stakeholders about, our perception of how the implementation is going and some of our priorities for the next 2 years of implementation. So you all have that report. as part of your materials. We really welcome your feedback. We got input from all of the committees in developing the report, but we also welcome feedback now that we've issued the report. We didn't issue it on anybody's behalf but our own. It's just from the Impact Stakeholder Committee. I think the major themes of the report are the master plan for aging itself is ambitious and robust and cross-cutting. The leadership posts that are now in place to implement the master plan, including the new position of Kim McCoy-Wade in the governor's office, the leadership of Susan and her team at the California Department of Aging, and all of the different cabinet agencies that continue to be engaged on implementation, is a phenomenal leadership team. And that we feel what's most needed over the next 2 years is a strong focus. It's hard with the number of initiatives and recommendations to kind of keep them all in your head. And some of them are big and transformational and complex. Some of them are more tactical. So we thought it would be helpful as we look forward to the next couple of years to have 2 or 3 big goals that have some focus from the governor and the administration. So, and we put forward trying to develop a more robust and comprehensive strategy around home and community-based long-term services and supports, trying to end homelessness for people over 50, and really leaning in heavily on equity and understanding the equity and disparity issues facing our state are the areas that we believe deserve the greatest level of focus over the next 2 years. So we have this convening coming up on September 20th, which is modeled off of like a White House conference on aging. This would be, a statewide gathering. You could call it a summit focused on disability and aging, with the the master plan as kind of the thing that is pointing us in a direction. And I think the hope is that we can all use the gathering on September 20th, which hopefully, public health situation, if it continues to evolve in a positive direction, that it will be an in-person gathering in Sacramento, and that a lot of us can come together in person for the first time in a long time. For some of us, like me, it'll be the first time I've met many of you in person. Hopefully the governor and other leaders in the administration can participate. And it's an opportunity for these various groups that are in advisory roles, the Impact Committee, the DAC-LAC, this committee, there's an equity working group, for all these various groups to think together about what's our message to the governor, what's our message to the public on September 20th in terms of where we want to put our priority moving forward for California. I think the master plan itself has positioned California as a national leader on aging. The way that we developed the master plan also positions California as a leader on bringing together the disability stakeholders with the aging stakeholders and developing kind of common priorities across these two constituencies that don't always collaborate, even though a lot of our issues are overlapping. And my hope is that it kind of sets the table for a second term for Governor Newsom, assuming that he gets reelected, and it helps to kind of reflect on what we accomplished in the first term. So I'm going to stop there. I hope I didn't say anything that was unhelpful, and I'll turn it over to Susan or Sarah if there's anything you all want to add.
All very helpful comments, Andy. Thank you. And Sarah Steenhausen is also on with us today. And I think many of you have met Sarah, who's the Deputy Director for Aging Policy, Research and Equity at the California Department of Aging. And part of her portfolio includes master plan implementation. So just as Andy said, our hope with this event, and it's being generously supported by 7 funders, the 7 foundation partners who helped support the master plan for aging. So this will be a free event for everyone to attend. And we will be setting aside time for every work group or advisory council to meet individually. Our hope is that it would be something similar to a convention where each advisory group would present a platform. And when you look at the timing of this, September would feed very well into the fall budget cycle and the January 10th budget for the coming year. It will also feed into the next 2 years of master plan for aging initiatives. So we'll be working with this group to help prioritize in time for the September 20th day of action, the priorities that you would want to elevate from this group. And I'll turn it over to Sarah now, who's been immersed in this, as has Amanda.
Thank you, Susan. It's great to be here and great to see everybody. The only thing I would add to what you said, because I really think you covered it, is, this is a really important opportunity for this committee, understanding it's a, this is only your second meeting, but to really organize on your own and come up with what your platform is, and it kind of empowering you all to figure out. It's hard, it's hard to get everybody together and come up with, if you had your own platform to present, what would it be? And so I think about the process that we went through when I was a stakeholder as part of the master plan for aging. We just had a lot of opportunity to build our relationships and our partnerships, as Andy was talking about, across aging and disability. But it really was in that developing our recommendations to the state where those relationships developed and where we were able to come to consensus. So hopefully in the next, several months, 3-4 months, there'll be opportunities for you all to engage and figure out what are the top priorities that you want to focus on to present your platform in September. So Susan, anything you want to add to that? I know we're going to be developing a kind of standardized approach to it so that you can obviously identify whatever priorities you think are important, but we'll have the same kind of template for all of the different stakeholder advisory committees to utilize in doing so. So very exciting, and look forward to seeing everybody then in person at the Sacramento Convention Center.
And Susan and Sarah, can I just add, as Susan mentioned, I came to California from Washington, D.C., and I just think it's worth noting that in the Obama administration, the leaders at the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level brought together the Administration on Aging with the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and created an Administration for Community Living. We have a newly nominated Assistant Secretary for the Administration for Community Living who ran AARP and the ARC and NAMI in Delaware before she was the Secretary of Health and Social Services in Delaware, Rita Landgraf. And when she was the secretary, her governor, Governor Markell, was the chair of the National Governors Association and focused his year as the chair on increasing employment for people with disabilities. And she was in the middle of that. So we have a federal partner in Rita and in the Administration for Community Living who are very strong, and I'm hoping there's ways for us to engage with them as we think about this day and agenda setting coming out of September 20th. And I continue to think when we think about implementing the master plan, that we have to find a way to engage the California Congressional Delegation. We have the biggest delegation in Congress, and a lot of them are on key committees that could really make a difference as we think about a federal agenda, for example, on the long-term care workforce, or some of the justice issues for seniors and for people with disabilities. So I just put that out there. Maybe it's because of my federal orientation, but I don't want us to ignore all of our allies and potential partners at the federal level.
Great. Thank you for that, Andy. Great point. The one other thing I would note is that as a replacement, you all will have this convening on the 20th of October, sorry, 20th of September, replace your fall meeting. So you have a meeting together as a big group in this setting in July, but then we will meet in September all together, and then you will not have your October convening. So so I think that in between now and the July meeting, there's a lot of opportunity for you all to convene on your own, however you would like to organize yourselves in the way that you think is best, and start figuring out what you think the most important elements of that platform should be.
Great. So we're happy to take a couple of questions if we have them. And I also wanted to just make the link that when Andy shared the report and that you all now have, there was a focus on including more older adults and people with disabilities and family caregivers directly in our work. And so that's something that will be a piece of this as well. So as you're developing your platform, that's another avenue that's open to you. It looks like Ellen has her hand up.
I do. Thank you so much. I just appreciated too that that the impact committee kind of tried to distill down to some very important areas. There's so much in the master plan, and there's so much great work that's going on. But that's one of the things we've done with the California Commission on Aging as well, is identify our top priorities. And we also had innovative models for long-term care services and supports / home and community-based supports as one of our top 5, as well as homelessness. The other thing we had that I think is crucially important to so many of us is the workforce issues. And so I would just like to elevate that. There's quite a bit of funds and efforts underway to address the workforce challenge. Thank you.
Susan, can I add one more thing?
Of course.
Thank you, Ellen. That is super helpful. And it also just got me thinking that within those big priority issues, what's also super helpful is if you think about, how the current master plan is structured, there are 130 or so initiatives. And that's what we're going to be focusing on for the next, iteration of the master plan. Most likely there won't be 130 more initiatives, but if you were developing initiatives, so focused objectives, what would those look like? And so that's just, the topic of workforce is so critical, but within that thinking, okay, what specifically needs to happen? Or within LTSS access, what specifically needs to happen? So that, it really can help inform the state's thinking of the next iteration. With specifics. So thanks, that's all.
Okay, well, Andy, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for your patience. You're the first one we're presenting this to. This was just signed off on by the agency and our funders. We set the date. You're the first to see this, the name that was selected, and we'll be sharing the template that Sarah mentioned with you. And the thinking there is we want to be sure that there's some order to what comes in. So with the 6 or 7 stakeholder committees, if one turns in 40 pages of recommendations and the other one turns in 1. So we're trying to balance that and have, provide some guidance so that it's, we see similar work products and no one is overburdened by this assignment. Any final thoughts, Andy, before you depart?
So Susan, thank you. Just the last thing I'll say, since I'm not on this committee, although I believe some of my Disability Rights California colleagues are on the committee, but this is the committee that is dealing with justice issues broadly. Is that correct?
Susan again.
Susan, yeah, that's correct. Okay, so the justice issue that I just wanted to bring up, that I hope that this committee will think about as you issue your recommendations going into the September 20th event, is the crisis standards of care that were developed during the pandemic, and just kind of what we learned during the pandemic about how we prioritize resources during a surge where we're doing healthcare rationing. As I'm sure a lot of people on this call know, we didn't start out in a great place in California. We ended up in a better place. But I think there were lessons from the pandemic around healthcare rationing that really need to be talked through so that we're better prepared for the next pandemic or the next time we're rationing, whether it's ventilators or ICU beds or whatever it is. So I just encourage you all to think about that as part of your recommendations going into the September event.
Thank you, Andy. And I'm going to step in. I think we may have lost Susan again. It's really challenging to participate when you're traveling. And we're going to kind of backtrack a little bit in the agenda order and turn to Carol Sewell. So Nancy, if you could navigate us back. I know there's a little bit of slides there. Thank you so much. Carol is a consultant to the California Elder Justice Coalition, and she will be doing a quick presentation about the A-Team project. So Carol?
Thank you so much, Maria, and thanks to all of you for the chance to share our work with you. I'm excited to hear about the September 20th gathering, and really excited about this council. And the project that I'm working on really ties to and is timed very well to work with the amazing opportunity that you have with this coordinating council. As you just heard from my colleagues, Lisa and Leslie, elder independent adult abuse come in many forms. They come from a variety of ways, and the response to these complicated and very complex crimes often require a coordinated and collaborative effort at the local level. And because of this, a lot of communities around the nation have formed elder abuse multidisciplinary teams, pulling together appropriate agencies and services to address these complex cases. Teams might typically include adult protective services, law enforcement, prosecutors, neuropsychologists, forensic accountants, public guardians, and other service providers. Multidisciplinary teams, we commonly call them MDTs, are able to coordinate partner responses and assure that the pieces are in place to bring a case to resolution, whether it be through successful prosecution or an alternate approach to restoring a victim's safety and independence. While the MDT approach is widely used and highly effective, teams also encounter situations where the system just isn't designed to accommodate the coordination that they need. Systemic issues can prevent an MDT from reaching a satisfactory conclusion. Issues like the lack of elder shelters so that an older victim can be taken out of a dangerous environment and protected. Things like financial institutions that fail to provide requested bank records or don't comply with court orders to help fulfill the needs of an investigation. Communication barriers that exist between agencies with information that could help further an investigation. And the lack of qualified professionals to conduct capacity assessments. Those are just a few of the systemic issues that we've heard about in working with basically pulling together a coordinated group of the state's multidisciplinary teams. The A-Team was created to study these systemic issues and to recommend solutions to address the issues. The members of our team were convened based on their expertise in the elder justice field and their willingness to pursue creative solutions to these difficult issues. We have a small team. The members of the team include Melissa Brown, who's the director of the McGeorge School of Law Elder Law Clinic, Debbie Deem, who is a retired FBI victim advocate and now coordinates a financial abuse specialist team in Ventura, as well as several SCAM MDTs in the LA area. Paul Greenwood, who is a retired San Diego district attorney, and a internationally renowned expert in the field of elder abuse prosecution. Angela Rosado, who is the coordinator of Riverside County's Elder Abuse Forensics Center, and Andrea Higgins, who is San Mateo County's elder abuse investigator and is also a stakeholder member of this coordinating council. This small team will be analyzing and delving into the issues that are brought to us by the MDTs. We'll be examining how other states handle these issues, where there are different approaches than California has been using. And we'll make recommendations to correct these systemic barriers, whether through proposed statutory or policy changes, administrative fixes, or by facilitating new approaches that can be implemented locally. We also hope the team will be bringing forward our recommendations to the Elder Independent Justice Coordinating Council for consideration and possible endorsement when we have the need for broader support. The issues the team is considering have been raised by the local MDTs. And we'll be meeting with local MDTs on a bi-monthly basis to give them updates on the work that the A-team is doing, as well as allow networking and to hear about new issues that they have discovered. The A-team is a project of the California Elder Justice Coalition, and it is funded through a 3-year grant from the U.S. Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime. The A-team model is an innovation that we hope will be furthered and spread around the nation. I don't know that any other state has a similar body to this, so we're very excited about creating this new model. And I look forward to the opportunity to bring updates back to your coordinating council as we progress, and would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
You, Carol. Just checking to see if there's any questions from committee members. Great, Howard.
I just wanted to say, Kel, I am very grateful that you are doing this work, that you and your Elder Justice Coalition are doing this work. I think that coordination between agencies is very important. And it's just so easy for, messages to get lost in the shuffle between agencies. If they don't communicate very well. Something that one agency might know, another agency might not know at all. And I think that it is very important that we speed up information transmission between agencies, because, if let's say there's a case of abuse going on, one agency might know something important, but if that doesn't get communicated to the other agency, the ball might get dropped and the case might fall between the cracks.
That's a really good point, Howard. Thank you. Even though most of the teams have agreements in place, MOUs and confidentiality agreements, and statutory authority to share information, we still see instances where it doesn't happen. There's actually legislation right now that Riverside County has put forward because they've dealt with a case where there was a parallel child abuse case going on that they felt could add to the investigation that they were conducting in regard to an elder who had been abused. But there was a barrier between the Child Welfare Service office next door and the APS office. They couldn't break that communication barrier. So it is an issue that needs ongoing attention and some creative thinking.
Carol, anybody else have questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much. Oh, did I miss somebody who had a question? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Carol. And I think we'll move to our next agenda item. Again, just kind of shuffling things around. We're going to turn to Blanca Castro. And
got it. Thank you, Maria. You're such a great facilitator.
thank you, Blanca.
So thanks. And I'm Blanca Castro. I'm the new California State Ombudsman. I'm approaching my 5th month of this program, and really excited about what I want to share with everybody today. And speaking about coordination, I do want to touch on that. Do you have the slider deck, or do I need to share my screen? There you go. Thanks. Next slide. I just want to remind everybody that our primary goal for the coordinating council is to increase the coordination and develop recommendations for the prevention and to address abuse, neglect, exploitation, and fraud perpetrated against older adults and adults with disabilities. Next slide. The long-term care ombudsman role, and it's just important to remember that we do have this very unique role in that we do investigate and we work to resolve complaints, but we do this only with the explicit approval and authorization of the resident. Although there are instances where we would have to report to law enforcement if somebody were in imminent danger or immediate danger. We also are responsible for educating residents and staff on the rights of residents. And the next couple slides is just to remind folks about some of the other things that we're involved with and we're responsible for. So during the pandemic, for example, investigations became much more, in the last 2 years, much more difficult. We were doing a lot of especially in the advanced healthcare directives. We had to figure out a way to do it via Zoom or having a photograph taken or some way so that we could do them virtually. And then, of course, just monitoring even cases that we were already involved in. But coordination is the #1 thing that we must do with all of our licensing organizations, CDSS, CDPH, and Department of Mental Health Services, Healthcare Services, rather. Next couple slides is just the reminder that we have to be vigilant in not just training and educating on what the rights are, but these are the basic rights. And in the next few slides that I'm going to show you, in the last 3 years, the data is what is informing the areas that we really have to be focused on and why coordination with not just within the state, but at the local level is so critical. Next slide. We continue to hear that visitation is a problem. We continue to have a lot of complaints around improper discharges or transferring clients right after the 100 days is ended for Medicare and then bringing them into another facility. So these are just reminders that these are just the basic rights that everybody should be able to not only adhere to, but should be protected. Next slide. So in 2019, and the next couple slides, you'll see the difference. But by and large, the #1 category are resident right complaints. And these complaints come not just from residents, they come from staff, they come from family members, they come from really just about anybody that can report this. But we also have a responsibility that when we do an investigation, we also have to cross-report to our licensing partners. If it's a residential care facility for the elderly, of course, we would report directly to CSS. We also cross-report to APS, Department of Justice. And then, whoops, go back another 2020. This was really the year where we were having some challenges going into facilities. Not only were the AFLs restricting visitors, but ombudsmen were being treated as if they were visitors and they were being prevented from entering. So by and large, we see that we still received calls on complaints, but in 2021, and this is what I wanted to show bring your attention to, we saw when we started to go back in, yes, we started to go back in, and that may be why we saw an increase. But we also know that during the pandemic, there were so many other factors. Less families were able to go in and visit, less eyes, less ears, staffing shortages. Not only were there staffing shortages because of the pandemic, but also waivers that were being granted. So we have seen a significant increase in the number of complaints. And what is daunting on this particular slide is even in the resident care. And if you look at and all of this is public information, but in some of these instances, it's a matter of just somebody calling for help and pushing their help button and nobody coming in and assisting them. We still continue to get complaints on chemical and or physical restraints. Next slide. So our focus and really the trends that we have noticed in the last several years, and what we really have to be vigilant about and trying to find a solution is that when you talk about equity, this is a population that is really being discriminated against. Not only are we seeing that the quality of care, and not in all facilities, but the number, I mean, when you're talking about 40,000 complaints in 1 year, and 57% of those were in abuse and neglect and exploitation. What we need to be able to do, and this is where the next slide will come in, is being able to really coordinate across all of these parties. And I've listed some of the folks some of the departments that we're working with closely. But what I have noticed in my short time at the Office of State Long-Term Care Ombudsman is that depending on where you are in the state, it's not quite consistent about how we coordinate. So one of the things that the priorities for this department is not only are we focusing on promoting the program, letting people know about the ombudsman, why we're there, what our role is, because it is very unique, but more importantly is making sure that residents and families know that they can organize and they can create councils and that they can affect change within the facilities and empowering them to do so. The next slide is some lessons that have been learned really quite immediately. Many of you have been involved in facility closures, but in my short time here in the office, and I've heard, you hear of some now and again, but what we are seeing is that the federal government is coming down pretty significantly on facilities if they are not complying and improving their quality of care. That's the good news. The bad news is that if they don't comply and the quality doesn't improve, this results in closures of facilities. And the first one I can talk about is in Healdsburg, where there really was no coordination. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I'm not pointing fingers, but what we have learned is that probably the most important thing is for all the agencies that are involved in this, including our federal partners, is to inform the state, inform the ombudsman, inform Department of Public Health, so we can inform our local ombudsman and local partners and prepare for any relocation if it is to happen. Kingston in Kern County, I thought was one of the better organized. And one of the reasons I will say is I'm going to tout the coordination and the collaboration that we receive, not only from Department of Public Health, Department of Social Services, Department of Healthcare Services, because this was an assisted waiver county. There was also a veteran who needed relocation, although he didn't want to go to a veteran facility. But that is the type of work and involvement that the ombudsmen are doing, is that they're responsible for really working with families, ensuring they have the communication and understand their rights. Yes, they can appeal, but under certain circumstances, such as decertification, it really is a little different than when there's a voluntary closure. The most current closure or potential closure we have is pretty daunting to consider. It's Laguna Honda. It's the largest skill or DSNP in the state. I don't know if in the country, but definitely in California. Currently, it has a census of 700 residents. Majority of them are on Medi-Cal. Many of them whom do have HIV/AIDS. They have mental health, behavioral health conditions, dementia, traumatic brain injuries, and CMS has issued the final letter decertifying them, meaning they're not going to receive any more payment for their for Medicare or Medi-Cal. The problem with this is that right now, I mean, there's a huge problem, but there really isn't any other large facility that we can relocate all these individuals. So talk about a coordination effort. There has been from the very start, as soon as we learned of the notification to Laguna Honda, and we've been involved with working with our partners, Health and Human Services Agency has really ensured that we are all coordinating, not just at the state level, but at the local level, so that we are working with the administrators, with staff, and with residents, but we don't want them to close. So working with them to ensure that they can comply, they can improve, but essentially they'll have three different options: appeal, apply for recertification, and or close and submit their relocation plan. So right now we are just in the midst of this. We're holding stakeholder calls. That's something that I've never seen, where Department of Public Health is the lead agency, providing updates on where things are at, how we are all working together, and we are working also with local public health officials, local ombudsmen, and other community groups. The next slide. So I wanted just to bring to light that as far as the Elder Justice and Disability Coordinating Council is concerned, this to me is one example of why we really need to not only stay coordinated, but in terms of sharing information. Granted, we don't share information on residents, but there are other things that we can share, such as what other facilities have availability, the medical assessments, and are the medical staff that are needed to do those assessments the right team that you're bringing in, and are there other options besides a skilled nursing facility that the resident may be eligible or be better placed at. So we have a big project ahead of us, but what I have seen in this short amount of time is the shift and the real willingness with a number of departments to really just roll up our sleeves and make sure that we're all working in line and coordinating. But since the ombudsman's not the enforcer, that's where we have to ask our partner agencies to come in and do the enforcement. And what we have seen is when somebody is on Medi-Cal, that there's definitely the discrimination on payment source. So that's an area that we as a state really need to address on how do we prevent this from continuing to happen. I've given you some links here, and one of our main goals in 2022 and 2023 is to revamp our public awareness collateral material and make it easier for people to find the ombudsman. Open to any questions. I know we're running out of time.
Thank you, Blanca. Looks like we have a question from Tony in the chat. I wonder if HCBS rules and the potential loss of an ability to bill if not compliant is having an impact on rights violations, or if you project HCBS having a future impact as we get closer to the deadline.
Well, absolutely, we're certainly looking at, in many of these instances, individuals really don't have an option in the community-based setting. So what other options do we have for individuals with what we really are seeing are very complex cases, and it's a growing population. So we are going to need the Laguna Hondas, we're going to need Kingstons, we're going to need these facilities, but I think what we're seeing that we need to improve upon are improving the wages for direct care workers, changing the way we pay for long-term care, and increasing the ability for more eyes and ears to be in facilities, and improving training, and really creating a ladder of promotion and career development from the aides at the bottom of the ladder to the very top. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks, Blanca. It looks like we have two other committee members with their hands up, so we'll go to Howard and then Liz.
Okay, thank you. Blanca, do you feel that many residents are being over-medicated and that, medication is being used as a means of controlling them sometimes?
We do have we do have consistent complaints about not just the chemical or the over medication, but the outcomes from that. So the falls, the incontinence, some of the other things that could be a result. So yes, Howard. And one of the reasons we are in support of Assembly Bill on the requiring informed consent, or that it would, and that it actually is going to make it an elder abuse case if there is no informed consent. And currently it is not.
Medication is important, but I feel that the outcome is being overused and being used, prescribed in wrong way, in incorrect ways. Medication is not everything.
That's right. Thank you, Howard.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Howard. All right, and Liz, I see you have your hand up as well.
Hi, Blanca. I wanted to know if you could possibly provide more information about the stakeholder calls related to Laguna Honda. I can email you offline if necessary.
No, please reach out to me. If you want to join that, we definitely will include you, because we just want to make sure we have as many stakeholders to provide the information. We're getting good questions so that it's informing what we need to be doing.
Thank you, Liz. Last call for committee members with questions, comments, anything you'd like to share?
Hello? Hello? Oh.
Hi, Gloria. We can hear you. We're getting a lot of static and some echoing. So if you can drop your question in the chat, that might be the most efficient way to share that. And I'll read off a comment from Tony. Scary thought, the more stress and challenges for the HCBS settings, the more we end up looking to these other settings like Laguna Honda. So thank you, Tony. And I will, I'll keep an eye on the chat in case other committee members want to jump in, but I think we'll turn to public comment. So thank you, Blanca. I'm going to take you off the screen for now. And looks like we have a public comment from Janie Whiteford. Janie, go ahead. I've opened your line.
Unmute. Thank you. I'm a committee member. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, I just wanted to say that I was delighted, Blanca, that you said that you were looking at getting information out to the public. I think that in a lot of cases, in a lot of counties, the public doesn't know what the ombudsman does and what their function is. So I think that's a huge area that we can see to have improvement in. And I was also wondering if you could comment on getting ombudsman and how hard that is, and whether you see a need for having way more than you currently have.
So thank you, Janie. Very quickly, that is something that we're proposing in the next budget year, where we would not this year but next year, where we could expand potentially the capacity of the local ombudsman program. They're 35, and certainly the pandemic made it more difficult to have volunteers. So what I'm hearing from a lot of the ombudsman coordinators is that they would like to be able to have a full-time individual to do recruitment, training, and management of volunteers. So there is a need to maybe expand more of the paid staff so that we can have more volunteers, because there is definitely a role for the volunteer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Blanca, and I apologize, Janie. I don't know how you got over into attendees. I thought I saw you in panelists earlier. Okay, let's turn to public comment. So just a reminder for attendees joining us, if you're joining us by phone, you can press *9 and that will add you to the queue. And those who are using either a computer or a smartphone, tablet, you can use that raise hand icon or engage by dropping your comment or question into the Q&A. And I'll keep an eye out for those hands. But in the meantime, there is a comment from Gloria. There needs to be more assistance for families that need to place their aging parent in a aftercare facility. Most doctors leave the decision to family members. It is a very hard decision for them. They do not know how to make the correct decision. So thank you for sharing that, Gloria. Pausing to see if there are any other public comments or questions. Okay. And Susan, I don't know if you were able to reconnect. I know we've had some challenges with connection today, and I don't think you were the only one that experienced them. So see if I can add a spotlight on you, and there you are.
Okay, well, thanks. Thank you all for your patience, and I apologize for the spotty internet. Thank you to all of our presenters today, to every one of you. What we can expect between now and the July meeting. The landscape work group will continue their work and bring back the next iteration to us in July. We will share with you once again the equity principles and tool, and ask for your feedback so that we can get that to the members of that work group and hopefully finalize that at the July meeting. And we will also share with you the template that was discussed in preparation for the September 20th convening in Sacramento. So that will be shared with everybody in a couple of weeks. And we invite you to start giving thought to what the priority items might be, if there were just several that were substantive that came out of this group that got advanced as part of that convening in September. And we wish you all well with your events and activities planned for the month of June. We are certainly excited at CDA and the Ombudsman program to be partnering with our sister departments, as you heard from Claire Ramsey. And I want to thank you all for your attention today, for listening, for your participation. And anytime you have suggestions about our format or topics, please send them to Amanda Lawrence. If there's anything that you think we should be doing differently or could be doing better, we want to hear that from you. And we thank you all. Have a good evening, and we'll see you all again real soon. Bye-bye.